And I'd like to welcome my co-hosts and friends of Boldly Now into the room. We have Michael Sean Conway, we have Doug Fisher, and we have Pablo Jenkins here, and we're going to be talking about the Generative Futures Initiative. And I think that's a huge, important next piece and addition to what it is that we're creating here, and a continued bridge into our collective future and thriving. So Michael Sean, Doug Fisher, Pablo Jenkins, welcome into our space. It's so glad to have you all here.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Rachel. And welcome all those out there watching the stream today to Boldly Now. This is our second of 5 sessions we're going to be holding this week. And this week, this one is a very special conversation for us. The Boldly Now is a initiative of the Generative Futures Initiative. So the Generative Futures Initiative was set up with by Doug Fisher, Pablo Jenkins, myself, and Ariana Ruiz. And we set it up last year to really explore how to think of long-term futures and think of thriving on the planet, and how we could accelerate that pace of change towards thriving, and how we could teach people to use futurism, and specifically generative futurism, to drive that change. Out of that, we decided we needed to have a function or initiative that would literally reach out to people, and that's how Boldly Now was invented. So it's with great pleasure, Boldly Now is actually going to do a segment on the kind of, if you will, the parent philosophical organization. So thank you, Doug and Pablo and Rachel, as part of Boldly Now. Thank you for having this conversation. We hope to cover some of the basic topics around generative futurism, around why we think this is a critical time in history. So before we get started too far, I'm Michael Sean Conway, filmmaker, storyteller, generative futurist, writer. Pablo and Doug, why don't you guys introduce yourself as well?
Pablo, please.
Go ahead, Doug.
Well, Doug Fisher, also, as Michael Sean said, a generative futurist. I think you got a number of futurists here. And author, and then also background in corporate consulting, leadership development, which is all for decades has been around, working in organizations, having them create new futures, not only for their organization, but really for their people, and that contributes to humanity itself in that way.
And I'm Pablo Jenkins, and I think my approach into futurism came from my background in investing in emerging markets and in impact investing, especially with family offices, as they try to think intergenerationally on how to, rather than just tweak small things into new ways of deploying all kinds of capital, including financial capital, one could really create longer term and more impactful ways of investing. And so I've done it at a corporate level, as angel investor in Asia, in Latin America, the Middle East. And I feel, we're in a very special moment in history to be able to take a perspective that comes from what's emergent and that goes beyond a single generation in its focus in a very tangible way.
Great. So let's, I'm gonna kind of just popcorn some ideas around here so we can get them into the space. So tell us, what is generative futurism? You guys want to take that one first, and I'll follow up?
Well,
sure. I mean, I'll go for a little start, then pass it to Doug. I guess generative in the sense of, I think two things on the name are useful. Futures, because there's not a single directed sense of control on what the future can be. But when we start to look at what to do among many challenges, I think we can do what happens mostly in life, which is like our brain has information from the past, our companies have information from the past, data, forecasting, tools, not that they're not helpful, but they're almost by their own structure going to give us a lot of the same results that we're trying to overcome. So for that, it often seems like a little crazy to think over 100 years out or thousands of years out. But we all have had ancestors that made gestures that have allowed us to arrive here. So it's, first of all, we are the present of long-term kind of actions and thinking. And the idea of being generative to me comes from the sense of almost tapping into a deeper source of creativity that goes beyond a single individual or a single lifetime, and to really sense transgenerationally, where you cannot even kind of take just the future and push it a little further, or take a nightmare and tweak a little bit. And it really means kind of having almost a bigger canvas in which to create possibilities, almost a mandala-like of the future from an us, that then gives us in the present both a possibility to relate in new ways, and also allows us to investigate things that are already happening. So it's not just pure science fiction, even though I think science fiction has some interesting things to invite us to do, but it allows us to start identifying spaces that are already showing that kind of possibilities into the future. And then rather than having to change the system from within the system, one can also find evidence of that future emergence in the present from a deeper kind of listening by doing it from this generative long-term approach.
Yeah, and I could add a few things. Because one of the things also that, just to add as a framework, is I think I can speak for Pablo, Michael, Sean, and Rachel, and myself, that we really want you to come away with something useful out of this, yes, some new ideas, definitely, but something you can actually put into action for yourself. And I think with regard to futurism, just in generally, you might consider all of us are futurists in a way, because we all are thinking about the future. We're all, whether or not how generative we are is another thing, but we're all thinking about the future quite a bit. And often the way we think about the future, now the future, it's probably not a stretch to consider the future lives in our imagination. It's not a physical thing like a phone or something like that. You can't go to the grocery store and get a pound of the future, but we're often and very often thinking about the future. But a lot, and riding on something Pablo said, a lot of the way we imagine the future is an extension of the past. And you might say there's Michael, Sean, there's a term you used about the past-based future. What was the term you used?
Predictive future.
Yeah. So there's a predictive future, which we typically live into. And then a lot of how that impacts us today is we do things to, tweak towards that, so more, better, different. And if you look at, and again, consistent with what Pablo was saying, the current things we're dealing with, you might say we're trying to, the way we, as a predictive future, see them, we'll try and fix them in some way. We'll try and do stuff, which we should do. So nothing wrong with that. But to cause a major shift, to bring about a new future, takes, and this is where the part of generative comes in, is to actually generate a future discontinuous from the predictive future. A future, and that's why Pablo said looking 100 years out, 1,000 years out, because 100 years out, we can begin to imagine that the problems of today have been handled. So if we're looking 100 years out to a future, then it's like, okay, well, what would we like it to be like? What would be all the great things we'd like to have in that future? What's really important to us that we'd like to have fulfilled in that future that gives a different imagining of the future? And again, there's a lot in what Pablo said, and echoing back to one thing he said, it's like that imagining of the future, that imagining of the generated future has an impact on us today, and has us take different actions today. And you might consider any major advances we've had, either societally, technology, any advances we've had have come about because someone and some group of people have started imagining a generated future beyond what was predictable. And in my view, this is something that if more and more of us begin engaging in this kind of generative futurism, that's what's needed to cause the shift that we want to cause. So that's what I would give as a, add to what Pablo said about generative futurism.
Yeah, great, Doug. You pulled some of the major threads here. Most of what we call futurism in this world is predictive futurism. And most predictive futurists won't predict more than a 2 or 3 year future. Because if they're wrong, they're not very good predictive futurists, right? So I have to gamble on circumstances going in a certain direction. And then if I'm right, the press will write about me and say, oh, in 2020, Michael Sean Conaway predicted X, Y, and Z. So then my actual success as a predictive future is upon predicting futures that happen. But they don't happen because I cause them to happen. They just happen because I read the tea leaves of the current circumstances well enough to talk about the future. Now, most of us, and I have in my past been a predictive futurist, most of us who do that kind of work and think in those terms, we're just looking at trend analysis. We're just looking at analysis of how things are going, maybe sentiment analysis and polling. And honestly, most of the conclusions that predictive futurists comes to are pretty obvious. Predictive futurists rarely predict a future that's not an obvious conclusion from where we are. We don't predict in January that in April, most of the world will be in sequestration and lockdown. We don't predict that because it's not connected to the current circumstances in any way. Thus, a predictive futurist is necessarily blind to the future. I'll say it again. A predictive futurist is necessarily blind to the future. And thus we all are. We are all blind to the future. It's not here. We can't put our hands on it. So what could we do about the future if we wanted to alter it? And that's where generative futurism comes in. It's where imagination comes in. It's where storytellers and visionaries of all types have placed their bets on a future that's not yet realized. And we do that to create a destination, a very specific place to head towards, and usually a why to head towards it. In our case, in the Generative Futures Initiative, we're talking about a thriving for humanity with a thriving planet included. So pretty basically desirable future for every human being on the planet, and I would imagine for most of the other species that live here as well. So we put something like that out here, and then we begin to describe it. Well, what would it look like if humans and the planet were thriving simultaneously? And in the describing of it, or as Doug might say, in the imagining of it, we actually get information that comes back from the future to us today about how to behave or how to orient ourselves, or what the gaps are. Like, oh, wow, we don't know how to handle that problem. We should start to solve for that problem. So I say a generative future orients us in current time to what we need to be doing and how we need to be behaving. And unlike predictive futurism, our job as generative futurists, which I really believe every human being has that in their makeup and DNA, our job as a generative futurist is to bring about the future we're describing, to cause it, to be a participant in having that future being realized. I'm going to kick it over to Rachel. And Rachel, I know you have some reflections on this, but I really wanted you to get to, like, well, what are some of the qualities of a thriving future or predicted futures that makes the thing we're talking about here important? What are some of the things that we're aiming towards that help us, that might really alter today? Because Doug, you said we should work on the current problems. Yeah, and I'm saying, wow, we should have a future to live into that causes us to orient towards a certain direction. You know, what is the tie between those two things, Rachel?
Could I just add one thing before, Rachel, because I want to echo one thing you said, Michael Sean, expand it briefly, is what Michael Sean described about the visionaries who brought about new things. The thing I want to make sure those of you who are listening and watching, that you have that too. You're capable of that too. And it's the more and more of us that are acting inside of this generative futurism, imagining the future, bringing it about. That's what's going to cause the shift we want to make. I just want to add that each one of us has that capability. Rachel, sorry for intervening.
Yeah, no worries. So I'd like to add a little piece to what you were saying, Doug, and it's out of a book written by Vishen Lakhiani, and he talks about the transition. And one of the things that he discusses in that book is that you don't start out as a visionary. You usually start out as a misfit. And the radical idea that you're bringing back from a place that doesn't exist yet is so off and not coherent with the reality that is in front of you. Not just misfit, but even dissonant, right? Like there's a strong dissonance with what it is that you're bringing into the space. And then eventually some people will start to kind of agree with you, and then like maybe a thought leadership and then visionary perspective. But when you actually reach a level of a tipping scale here, you actually become a way shower because you were a way seer. And that, I think, is at the leading edge for all of us to lean into and to glean into the majesty of all that is, to figure out what actually wants to be accurately or in the right fitting of things in the correct timeline to bring things forward. And from that perspective, in my own humble opinion of what I think the generative future that we are striving towards, which was Michael Sean's question, was that we are leaning into a world that works for everybody, where at the highest level of creation, we are choosing to see all of life and all of existence as something that is not separate from us. And so not only is it to be supremely revered and cultivated and nurtured into its best possible potential, but to realize that it, whatever it is, reaching its best possible potential is actually I reaching my best possible potential and working in unison to have that happen. And so whether you're looking at things from a scientific, medical, economic, socio region, climate change, education, any of these systems, hopefully that's the end result. And depending on each person's sovereign ability to adjust in those unique spheres of influence in which whomever it is navigating through, it is theirs to bring the best of their intentions into that field, like at the highest level. And for us, as the person who's not in that space, to come into full trust with how that person or how that system or how that project or how that idea is being stewarded and nurtured in the world without any level of criticism or degradation or amplification of a dissonant chord that would not bring further harmony in, because creative energy has some dissonance to it, but like strong dissonant chords that come in the place of destruction, which come from the place of lack of trust, are the pieces that I think that we have the opportunity to transcend. And the bold way to do that is to be boldly brave in the worlds that we are choosing to navigate in the way that we are choosing to have our ideas come through and speak them with the level of grounded clarity and ferocity that's needed during these times to penetrate whatever existing narrative is happening, so that it can land into a fertile environment, and where we get to also look into and be completely aware of the existential risks that are involved with that, as well as the existential breakthroughs that are wanting to be given to us in its full capacity. And the only way to do that, I find, for me anyway, is to just try things on. See how it fits, whatever the idea is. You can even, sometimes when you get into a wave of visionary conversation, sometimes the conversation or the idea isn't quite like on, yet. And so it's good to tell your friends and your loved ones, particularly if you live in a house with people during quarantine where this might happen more often, to say, you know, I'm going to try this idea on for a moment and see how it feels. And instead of like wobbling the field of your reality with lightning bolt after lightning bolt after lightning bolt, it's good to have a little bit of grace in how you shape conversations and which ones you're taking into manifestation and which ones are in a place of still the imaginal place, still the place of development, and like know the difference within yourself so that you have a trusted field of team members around you that you're actually building something with and can help you nourish, activate, or manifest whichever part of the process any of these insights are coming from.
Great. I love the grounding and kind of looking at how we move from the imagination of the future into our action today. You know, how do we harvest or bring into the world some of those insights? How do we take our passion and ideas and then get them into action in the world? Now, Pablo, you've been doing a lot of action around regenerative agriculture, regenerative development, investing into those worlds. And I remember with some of our early conversations about what's the leap from regeneration to generation. And I think for the Generative Futures Initiative, you've really been holding the pole of like, well, what can the planet look like, or how can we live in harmony with that, or in alignment with that in a future? Talk to us a little bit about, what is going to be required of us to create a thriving planet?
Yeah, that comes very close to my heart at multiple levels. Having both grown up in Costa Rica and my father passed away last week, the youngest of his siblings. So I've been reflecting on many things that are connected. One is legacy, purpose, longevity. And my father and uncle were the pioneers creating actually the Urban Development Institute in Costa Rica, and very close to the people who eliminated the army. The president who eliminated the army 70 years ago, his daughter, Cristina Figueres, has worked a lot on what this decade means for the planet after the Paris Agreement. And the core insight I feel very strongly, and I felt for a long time, is first of all, there can be no longevity, no matter how much you biohack yourself, if the planet is collapsing. We're seeing this now, in a planet that cannot breathe, that's burning in the Amazon or Australia or anywhere, or that the ecosystems are falling apart. I think what's generative is what is a trustworthy place to have a creative confidence, to go from misfit to visionary. And I think the expanding circle of concern for us makes a lot of sense to be planetary. Still in the age of my parents, they were coming from World War II, and Costa Rica was an early country that was mostly rural. It was a lot of how to create thriving urban places where people could live well. And even there, I think that the circle was a little small. I think cities are very much, but if one really went deeper, and I think that was at the core, maybe not of only the family business, but at the intention. Regenerative places, and Costa Rica did manage to do this, about a third of the country got cut down to do farming of very low intensity, for example, cattle. But then it wasn't just like, okay, keep what's left and try to not destroy more, as if you just want to make a nightmare less bad. It was a sense that ecotourism and blue zones and longevity and planting in a permaculture way could actually come together. And in 20 years, the country more than doubled tropical forest coverage. 56% of the country is now covered from 21% after the destruction. So clearly the standard of keeping 0% destruction is not very, it's not very exciting. Just be like, let's destroy less, let's kill less. But in that time, the population doubled and GDP tripled. So even by economic terms, it was a good idea to regenerate. Now, that's at a small little country and family level. Why is the planet really, I think, the right scope, and the generative future the right place? I think because there, the aliveness of ourselves, the thriving of our societies and humanity and the planet are so obvious the same. There is no such thing as a successful society in a failed and broken ecosystem and economy. it's very sad to see some of our neighbors, like you see Venezuela now, that when I was growing up was always supposed to be like so richly endowed by oil reserves, by national forests and stuff, but that doesn't make any sense to try to do these false compartments. So as I look in the context of also my work in regenerative spaces, where the way of living, the way of actually also learning from nature, you know, Rachel spoke about the imaginal cells. I see the butterflies in her wall, and you see the miracle of this transformation. And a few billion years of evolution have also given us insights that by living and regenerating with nature, we're in a very deep way not alone. Not only have not other misfits that become visionaries helped us show paths that are generative, nature itself has that quality at its very core. So I take on the legacy of my past generation that was about creating urban spaces for people to thrive as an invitation of more our generation of how can the planet's wisdom and a boldness of really finding what's most trustworthy in us. And it's almost never what we can control. Right now, it's very obvious to many people that few people really control what's about to happen. It's a deeper sphere of possibility that allows to really, with nature, bring, I would say, things that are, this is my closest, shortest definition, things that are life affirming. And that's where generation and regeneration come together. And where you cannot be life affirming by destroying what seems to be separate from you, which is obviously itself the mirage, you know, like that's the wrong perspective. And also even separated in time, as if we and our ancestors had somehow gotten separated. And so I'm very excited to see this decade be both very pivotal. We could be destroying a lot of life, or also it could be really the ultimate invitation to imagining from the future, someone coming and seeing this recording, not just random social media or random results, and see like, what were people discussing when this shift in what was possible and interconnectedness was happening? Now, not theoretical, like then the people shift where they live. I'm moving to live in a blue zone by the coast in regeneration. So myself, I'm doing those shifts. And I think this is an invitation that many people are feeling maybe from the corner of the eye. And what makes generative more possible is to get a trustworthy sort of early tribe in the planet that invites that to not be a side thing, but almost butterfly-like, a sense of like, let's fully merge into this place of creation. And that's where I see the planet being able to provide food, water, soil, not as separate problems, as really life-affirming co-creation that regenerate what's been destroyed, but actually generate new possibilities. And that, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's for sure possible. And nature has a lot of wisdom for that. You're on mute.
Michael, Sean, you're muted, but while you're unmuting, let me just add something to what Pablo said, because and it's a little bit of a meta conversation, but one of the things that was so great, Pablo, and here what you're saying is like the passion you have for it. It so communicates, it so comes across. And again, bringing it back to those of you listening, watching, that's, you know, for each of us, there are things that we're passionate about. There are things that are like so important to us. And that's, for me, also another key part of generative futurism. It's not merely about some future. Yes, it is about a future for humanity beyond our lifetimes, but it's also about impacting us today, and in a way in which each of us gets to express our burning desire, our passion, and contribute that to a thriving humanity. And that's again available for all of us. So, Michael, Sean, now that you're unmuted, go ahead.
No, thank you. So Pablo, you talked about how many years did it go from 21% to 51%? How many years did that take?
Just over 2 decades, like 23 years.
23 years. And so you have to start, I just want to just tease something apart here. So the people that were making the decisions to take the actions, not to cut down more forest and make, do cattle farming or having to do this, and to take actions to protect rainforest or protect land, to actually do that. They weren't expecting that would make an impact in a year or 6 months or a quarter, right?
No, and they did not even make it planning that would make ecotourism happen. They
Right.
knew there's something else, but exactly right. And they did not even have power for all of those other governments. They had to put an idea that was powerful enough that other people want to keep up rather than be thrown back and forth in a democracy.
So they came up with an idea to, and they probably didn't have the term to regenerate the land and regenerate the forests. And that idea is still functioning and working in Costa Rica today. You're still, obviously there's lots of benefit from it now, but what would you say what is the trajectory of that idea, and where is that heading for Costa Rica just a little bit? And the reason I'm teasing this out, Pablo, is I want to really make a distinction for our audience that, a lot of generative futurism is about transgenerationalism. It's not about what's going to happen in my lifetime or even maybe my kid's lifetime or their kid's lifetime. It's like, how do I understand? How do I see that I can be the impulse for something coming into being that's going to outlast me, and that it may not even fruit or it may not even flower for generations into the future.
Yeah. So I'll be succinct, but I think this has a lot of useful tools that I've seen in my life that I think apply for the world. So when the national parks were created and the army was eliminated in the case of Costa Rica, I think I'm of the planet, they did not know the effects. They just imagined a place where national parks would let nature preserve things. They just imagined that nature had a wisdom in the biodiversity, but there was not even the word regeneration. There was not the word ecotourism. This was just after World War II. And the sense of not having an army seemed relatively bold. Even now it seems bold, in a very dangerous zone. But so what was the vision? And it's, again, my uncle was part of that vision with my father. My father was much older, and my uncle was born in 1926. So I know this firsthand. They felt that there was a way of interconnecting and thriving that was about well-being, healthcare, and education being more important than defending from your current, so to speak, enemies. And that nature would give you some of the ideas when it kept coming back. So just not cutting down was not that engaging. So it was partly they needed something to make up longer term, I would say, beacons to go towards. But I know first, and they didn't have any of the solutions. Then I'll just connect to another personal thing that to me has been powerful. And Michael Sean, I've shared this with you a bit. This friend and person that I admire a lot that we spoke with from France, but has worked a lot in Africa, has made me think a lot about what Africa's potential is also in this decade. The cities have not been built like in Latin America. We met in the context of this expedition to Greenland, and we saw a 70-kilometer glacier collapse with water that was 50,000 years old. So one doesn't even need to be very theoretical. So you're 50,000 years ago, that water got, and the air was there, and somehow it's collapsing at the same time. Sensing what Africa can be right now, it's really a place of imagination. It's not it's all done. In many parts of the world, it's not done, but even the cities, when I go to Houston, it's harder for me to imagine a Houston. It's totally possible, but it's sometimes harder to imagine it with no cars, with just permaculture gardens. So sometimes we're just in this crux by looking deeper rather than getting overwhelmed. And I mean deeper in time. We imagine other people are going to show up and do part of the generating. And I think that's what also happened with nature. People thought, okay, 30 years from now, people will find what a country that's rather than 15% covered by tropical forest, but half of the country, over half, they will find more to do. And this was always in the sense of what I did sense from the possibility, which is you're putting something that is both bold and exciting, but also other people will build on it. And now that I think what we can learn from Costa Rica or Bhutan that connects to Africa, that makes you from the back of your mind feel we're not just tweaking things, we're setting up stages that we may not see, are the people whose grandchildren there may not even see, but the gesture stays there. And the gesture, I think this is why this time is so key, includes a kind of curiosity, what more is possible. So I think the sense of possible is very different from the sense of predicting. Predicting, you almost want it to be right. You almost want to know. Possible, invites a curiosity to say like, for sure don't know and will not know for a while. So even more, it's like, am I going to a place worth going with values that feel life affirming? And I think that's what helped this stay on, because a law is not that strong. Even, who knows, capitalism and democracy are short experiments. When you look at 50,000 year water that this melts, those things were built and are falling apart from another set of waves that come in and out. So where do I find life affirming spaces? It's like in that kind of like passion and love and connection, and that's generative. You know, like passion is contagious even more than a virus.
I just thought about what it's like to create a generative future from the Latin perspective. Like that really great to invite that level of passion and fun and you know, in some way innocence back into it.
I would say wonder.
Yeah, and
Sense of wonder. And I feel that when I dance tango with this tango teacher, that she teaches tango with no steps. It's all improvisation. Every place, you never have then any mistakes, only new possibilities. And that really, when you do that in a hug of connection and communication, is so real. You know, so it goes from like theoretical, the future, possibility, wonder, to like each step is new possibility and wonder.
Well, and maybe that's why you guys have like one of the very few blue zones that exist on the planet.
Yes, I think that happened. And it was because people, they don't go to the gym more. They live longer years, but in the blue zone, I met with this guy, 104 years old, that they had told me about. And he was not trying to like biohack himself or go to the gym or like do like, he's like, I don't even go to the doctor. Like my doctor died 30 years ago. So like, you know, like he was talking about how like this 70-year-old woman, like I think was flirting with him. He showed a garden that he was working on at 104. And he's like, just wait 10 years. It's going to look great in 10 years. So he spoke with the children in the elementary school. I don't want to be overly simplistic. I'm not saying it's all good. I'm saying but this is real. Like what you say, like this Latin zone had some of that, like not more technology. And that's where now that I'm living there, I see the other wisdom, which is like, it's next to a place where turtles, the second place where turtles have come the most for the last thousands of years. Like for some sense, they're also coming to this beach. And it's amazing when you see them go decades and thousands of and thousands of kilometers, come back to this little place, and a place where aliveness comes from walking naturally, comes from a sense of purpose, comes from community intergenerationally. And these things, the wisdom has been there. Now, what else could we do from there is my question. Not to celebrate lifetime achievement awards to long living people, because that's not even what they're trying to do. They feel they want to do gestures from over 100. That's one of the 5 places with most centenarians, that blue zone, to what we wanted to map deeply with GFI, the future is like, where are there other places that are thriving around the planet? Like look into parts of Africa, look into parts of India and say like, you know, these are not just places that need help. They are, without the obvious instruments of the system of modernism, thriving with their environment. And it could be at a small scale, maybe not the whole country is thriving or not everyone, but then you say how to, from a sense of wonder, what's working and how can we increase the probability that more of that generative energy is present in the planet, rather than just spend a lot of time complaining why the system is messed up.
I want to point out something here that I think is really important. And we're talking about thriving zones and how do we support thriving zones on the planet. We also really feel that there's this hyper-locality about these things. We're not looking for a scalable solution. We don't want the entire planet to be a monoculture, to have a single way of doing things. We're actually looking for ways to understand and see and envision very specific local solutions for very specific local people and cultures. And that's a very different approach than the past-based patriarchal, here's the way to do life on the planet. We believe that every local area, that the land has knowledge and information, that the people there have knowledge and information. And what we can really do collectively is understand that, see are there principles and ideas behind that, or maybe we can bring people from one place to another to see something and that sparks something for their imagination, for their locality. We do believe that there's some very, very important systematic global things that need to happen in terms of protecting, human life, protecting people from exploitation, and also for the planet, protecting the shared ecosystems, the oceans, the air, the biodiversity on the planet. And so I get so excited when I hear you talk, Pablo, because one of the things that's important about the future, especially the imagined or generated future, is that we find some evidence that it can work today. We actually look over there. There's the future. It's showing up. It may be a 100-year future for some places, or even other places, it's a 200-year future for that place. But here it is. Here's a little piece, a little spark, a little ember of what the future could be like. And so, part of imagination is not just seeing inside, it's actually looking out into the world and seeing the same thing being reflected back to you. Thank you, Pablo.
Michael Sean, let me just add one thing you said about the evidence, because I think another thing for all of us is when we see evidence of things working, to share it.
Right.
There's a lot each of us can do. And one thing is sharing what is happening, what is working, that really helps, because it can help, as you pointed to, sparks the imagination of others. Like when Pablo's sharing about what's happening in Costa Rica, I begin to think, oh, what might happen? What could I imagine here in Denver that might be relevant to that? So it helps spark each other's imagination, and there's the collective uplifting that comes from that.
Visioning is a community experience. Even when we envision ourselves, we tend to share our visions immediately. Or when you wake up from an interesting or strange dream, first thing you want to do is to share that dream. I had this dream, and you'll never guess what happened in it, right? I think maybe part of our storytelling DNA as human beings comes from this experience of wanting to share what we see. And so, so part of generative futurism is also storytelling and being able to share your imagination in different ways. Share the good news if you have good news. Share solutions if you have solutions, and ultimately, and this is the story of Boldly Now. Get into action to make those things happen on the planet. To actually see some progress. Maybe not in our lifetime, and I want to just deepen that distinction a little bit. And Pablo, I'm gonna share a story that you shared in a minute. We really kind of get that human beings tend to, when they design things for their own benefit, or for their family's benefit, or their tribe's benefit, or maybe their company's benefit, or design things for the benefit of a nation. And when I mean benefit, I mean benefit over. So everybody's gonna have a lot, but my family's gonna have a little bit more. And it's not out of a bad sentiment. I think at the root of our humanness, we want to, that which we hold important, that we care for, we want to protect. And so it's hard to design for the entire planet and all the species on the planet in a protecting a small part of the planet mentality. And so if we can get out beyond our lifetime, or maybe beyond our children's and grandchildren's lifetime, then we have a place that we're free to invent something without needing to protect something at the same time. We actually get liberated to just freely invent for all beings. And we talk about at the Generative Futures Initiative that 100 years is a pretty good amount of time. It's really hard to imagine more than 100 years. Your children still may be around, their grandchildren, but you can't really imagine designing something to benefit them. And Pablo once said, yeah, I'm going to have to go out a little bit further than that, because, maybe Harvard's going to erect a statue of me, and that statue has to crumble to the ground so that I don't even get any of the benefit of the work that I'm doing. And I want to just kind of get really clear about that. I want to design so that I don't get the benefit of what I'm doing, that I'm doing the benefit for the planet and for people who have not even been imagined yet. And that participating in that has a depth of soul to me that I don't know, it satisfies a longing to really truly be a contribution in a profound way in me, And I just have to imagine that if we can tune into that for ourselves individually, to live our lives for that future, yeah, I don't think there's anything more moving for me in the planet.
Yeah, Michael, Sean, I think that taps into, I don't know how to say it, like something really important for all of us. If we really look like actually contributing to something that has that kind of impact that's really beyond ourselves. And that, again, that makes a difference for us today. It gives me a different today, it gives me a different me today when I take on something like that, which is, I think, an important part of this whole notion of generative futurism. It's not merely about a future that we're divorced from. We may not see it, but we're definitely connecting it. It might say embodying it now.
Yeah. And I want to point one thing, because I think it can give often the impression that worrying about more things is going to overwhelm you. Because, and Bob Thurman often makes this example, like you take this scenario, like the size of yourself, and you're like, did I look smart? Like, do I have enough money? Like is my house cool enough? And already you're like, I'm even struggling with that. How can I worry about all people? But actually, most people that care about others realize that loving others actually makes the little silly things of the ego not go away, but take perspective. And I feel the same with time. And I used to feel earlier in my life that I had to run more to do more. And a good mentor helped me get the perspective also of nature. You know, like a tree often lives hundreds, thousands of years, doesn't even need to run around, do much. And from where it is, it has a very life-affirming function by being present to life, so to speak, even with a level of consciousness lower than our human possibilities. So I think my invitation is to go from curiosity rather than feel like, oh, I'm gonna have to take on more tasks and get them right. It's more like, what am I rooted from that's already holding me, the way the open earth holds kind of all of us, and a volcano always already there. And then you just keep almost like the tree, just doing that generative place, because just imagine in how many ways it can be used. So it both has the sense of like, not even a statue or a book about you, or like your grandchildren celebrating you, but because my father died of Alzheimer's, I also got the process of letting him go through dementia, which is both very hard, but gave me this insight. For a while, he could only sense music. We could not even talk about the future or plans, or did he feel proud of me? He could, and then like maybe a hug, a loving way of just being present there. But still, it was a kind of gesture. Like, I mean, this is the thing, that it's not everything we create has to come from like more planning, doing, and data. It is, of course, useful, the tools. But what's generative, I think it's the opening even more space. And if you think the people who came hundreds of years before us and thousands that have passed wisdom of the earth and wisdom of courage and overcoming, keeping this, I think that I would close with this, like going beyond cynicism. That's what also the future really gives you. Because you could be like, oh, I'm going to do this, but then like, are they going to even like value it? Like then it's not even, that's not even the point. It's just like, is this worth putting the life into that bolder ocean? And I feel the issues we have at this time in the planet require some of that. Otherwise, they become very easily overwhelming to any single person that has very little control at the core over a short period of time. But it's really a part of like, if so much has happened until now, how much more is possible is what I feel most alive to.
Rachel, why don't you give us a little bit on that? I just want to pull you in here because I know you have a lot of depth in like thinking about being in relationship to these kinds of generative ideas.
Sure. Let's see. I want to talk about biosphere communication and hyperlocalization as well.
Great.
So when we look at accessing biospheric communication technology from the ancient future, it's our way, and hopefully a new mimetic way of saying that we are choosing to lead from the ancient lineage perspective of becoming a portal for creation to flow through that not only accesses all life on this planet and lends a voice to those who do not have one, including the water, the trees, the land masses, the animals, the children, so on and so forth, but also the ancient future and intentions and imaginations who created us into existence into the first place and whose shoulders of whom we are standing on, as well as the future that we're choosing to orient ourselves to, and then create some sort of multi-dimensional or transgenerational and trans reality synthesis of what all that means into this present moment, which is why the concept of Boldly Now is such an imperative. And when we look at the mixing that with the concept of hyper-localization, it goes well beyond the extension of our hyper-local communities, but to actually go into a deeper level of knowing that hyper-localization is a foundational key point that creates all of the biodiversity that has existed since the beginning of time, that actually creates a long-standing impulse in the world. And so to understand the genomic code of what that means for, let's say, soil and how important that is, let's say our own biome in the human body and how important that is, as well as the community structures, the cultural structures, and the global structures that we're navigating. I think what we're finding in these extreme times of isolation through meeting the vast opportunities of globalization, we're feeling this huge disruption right now of feeling that things aren't quite right. Maybe you might have thought that a time or two of recent. And in that, there's a huge opportunity to understand how to refine inside of our own genomic codes of our imaginal cells that are in our intuitive, intelligent, and ethical perspectives to bring those forward in a very new way that holds a crystal clear container that then allows us to begin to work in unison of the biodiversity, the genetic diversity, the ideation diversity that's wanting to come through right now for life to actually proliferate in the planet in the way that I think we all have the intention of creating, where it all just kind of works. And by following these simple ways of knowing the biodynamic and the biospheric awareness, communication, collaboration, and celebration path of victory from not just our species, but in service of all life as life for life, we begin to really develop a new way of understanding how to show up fully present with everything that you have and be unwavering from that place. And that's, I think, what we're really inviting the world into right now collectively, not just at Boldly Now, but with World Unity Week and with all the other global initiatives that are supporting this event and the others that are attached in this mycelial network of manifestation that wants to come through right now. How can we access that is by tuning in and be absolutely clear with what is it that's ours to do right now, and see how that fares with the world that we're meeting, and not let ourselves have the excuses of all the reasons why it can't work anymore. Because this is not the rehearsal time anymore, right? There might have been this like development stage that we all might have been in and figuring things out. And sure, we can all continue to have our own introspective experience of this time, but it's game time, folks. Like we are not on the benches anymore. We are not in the classrooms anymore. We need to actually create this new world, and from a place of creating it in a way that we never knew was possible means that we have to be able to release everything that we currently have in our world now to actually shift to go from one world to another world, so that the perspective is there. The planet's always the same, but two people can be in the same place and have completely different world perspectives. And I think that's what we're opening up to, is the collaborative synthesis of those worlds going in unison together that are on a plugged in place.
Yes, great. If we had another hour, we could get into world building as a topic because that's a big part of Generative Futures Initiative. We will promise you that that conversation coming up soon. And I want to just give Doug a chance to kind of wrap up and any last thoughts you might have to bring us home.
Well, one of the last things again, because for me, it's always coming back down to you. Like, what are you? What are we? What am I as an individual going to do? And one of the things, echoing something Pablo said earlier about, and I may not say it exactly as how you said it, Pablo, but not waiting to have everything figured out before we take action. You know, it's even if we have a spark of an idea, take action, because it's in the action that you might say the future will reveal itself to us. You know, Michael Sean pointed out earlier, we'll get information from the future that we wouldn't get otherwise. And, you know, I've kind of figured for myself or resolved for myself, I might never have the big idea that produces a thriving humanity. You know, and you know, those of us listening, we might not have the big idea, but it doesn't. I keep remembering a quote from Mother Teresa: "We can do no great things; we can only do small things with great love." And that taking action with our desire for the future, with our desire for a thriving humanity, and seeing what unfolds, and keeping imagining that 100-year future that for us is what we would like to see. And even a small action today makes a big difference 100 years out. You know, Michael Sean shared with me one time, well, Ben Franklin left, what was it, Michael Sean, like $500 to the city of Philadelphia?
It's around some number of thousands. We'll get a fact checker out there.
But it was you know, a few thousand to the city of Philadelphia. But the deal was they couldn't take it until, what was it, 200 years or something?
100 years, I think 100 years and then 200 years. They could take a certain amount after 100 years and another amount after 200 years.
And how much did they get at the end?
It was like, you know, 20 million after 100 years and 200 million after the 200 years. So, you know, our actions compound over time is what Benjamin Franklin was trying to teach the world.
Exactly.
He was a generative futurist for sure.
and that's the thing, is our actions today will produce like millions of, you know, if you did it monetarily, but it's the actions aren't all monetary, but like the impact we have in terms of whatever action we take toward a thriving future for humanity will produce huge results in the future that we may never see. And so for me, it's each of us taking whatever actions we can on a daily basis in that way.
Fantastic. Boldly Now will wrap up now and turn the stage over. I want to emphasize what Doug just said. Generate a future and invest in that future over time, not just your investment of time and energy and love, care, but your community, and then pass that on. You know, like, look at how we can create a human chain to a 100 and 1,000 year future, and know that you're connected through that human chain to a thriving future for humanity and a thriving future for the planet. That's all for Boldly Now. Rachel, we'll turn it back over to you. Thank you all who have been listening, and thank you all who've been on the call in the participants area.
Thanks so much, guys. This has been such a joy to be with you this morning.